The prophet comment sounds like he's been hanging around you too much, JJ. But we are glad that you're here with us this morning. We're excited that you're here with us at Chenal as we kick off a new series today called Then Sings My Soul. I started thinking about this series about a year or so ago when Miss Janet Smith, it's me, it's Janet Marie, showed up to church with a box. And this box, which sits out in our lobby most Sundays, is an opportunity for you to write down a song that maybe you want to hear in worship that you haven't heard in a while, and it goes straight to Jeff. It is a way for you guys to be involved with kind of the worship planning a little bit, but also to give us an insight on songs that you like and you appreciate. Now, over the last year, we've tallied this, and the most requested song at this church is Freebird. And Jeff, you're still out on Freebird? So Jeff's saying we're not singing Freebird. You can keep voting for it, but it's not happening. But in all seriousness, what has really been cool about that box is it shows the songs that mean something to you all. Now, we didn't ask you to give us a reason as to why you wanted to sing a song, but I'm sure that if we did, you would say, hey, during this really rough season of my life, the words in this song just did something for me. They meant something to me. For me, if I were to write a song down, I would tell you that I love this song because when I was a kid, I remember watching my grandmother, Miss Janine Oglesby, stand up, close her eyes, and sing those songs to the best of her ability. That's why I connect with certain worship songs that we sing at this church. Those memories and those experiences that I've had throughout my life, they mean something. And so as I was thinking about that, I started thinking about the individuals that actually wrote those songs. Because yes, we have emotions and connections to them. But the individuals that wrote those songs, those verses, those words, those choruses, they also were writing from personal experiences. Perhaps it was a passage that spoke to them or a life event that changed who they were forever. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to look at a few hymns that we sing as a church that you've probably sung your whole life. And we're going to talk about the stories behind those songs. And to start us off today, I want to take you back to the exciting time of the 1800s. In 1871, something happened in the city of Chicago that would change its trajectory forever. It was on October 8th, 1871, that an accident started something that would demolish the city. Now, this is kind of the fun part of the conversation of who done it. Some people believe that an arsonist started this event in 1871. There are other people that believe that it was just an accident that happened in a barn. Still others believe, and this is my favorite theory, that the O'Leary's cow started the fire of 1871 in Chicago. There are people that believe that this cow got upset and with its hind leg kicked over a lamp, and that lamp started the Chicago fire. Now, I know what you're thinking. Was there any redemption for this cow? This cow's great-grandmother started Chick-fil-A. Things worked out. All right. I was told not to tell that joke because it was not funny, but thank you for who you laughed. But regardless of who did it, a fire started on the south end of Chicago on October 8th, 1871. Now, there were several factors that are going to make this fire incredibly bad. The first were the conditions that Chicago was experiencing at the time. It was an incredibly dry summer that went into the fall. So everything was dry in the area. But on this particular day, there were strong winds from the south pushing north. And so what happens is the fire begins on the O'Leary's farm, south side of Chicago. And they do what you do when you see a fire, is they call the fire department. Now, at the time, there were 185 Chicago firefighters employed in the city of Chicago. Of about 300,000 residents, 185 individuals were firefighters. Now, they had, and this is what I thought was kind of neat, 17 horse-drawn water wagons. Sounds like a party to me. So, 185 firefighters, 17 water wagons. They go to the resident. When the firefighters show up, there's no fire because they've been sent to the wrong address. By the time they got to the O'Leary's farm on the south side, The fire had started pushing north because of the winds. And it wasn't just the winds that made this terrible. Here are a few artistic depictions of how fast and how ferocious this fire became. It quickly crossed the Chicago River, going into the north side of the city. But what made it worse, in my professional opinion, was this particular. It's called balloon framing. In Chicago, this was the popular way. Ron knows all about balloon framing. But balloon framing allowed them to build these houses as close as possible together and maximizing the square footage. And so these houses were basically built on top of each other. They used wood and tar on the roofs. Incredibly flammable. And so the fire grew out of control. And the fire went on for days. The first relief that they had was actually when rain happened a few days later. But a lot of people believe that the fire was so hot, was so severe, and did so much damage that it would be days, even until the fire ended, that they could go and assess all of the damage in the city because it was still so hot. People lost everything. A lot of historians will estimate that about 300 people died in this fire, but most people believe this is a low conservative number. There's no way that only 300 people died in this. It's a picture of what some of Chicago looked like after the fire. Complete destruction. I mentioned a moment ago that at the time, in 1871, there were 300,000 residents in the city of Chicago. In a 3-day span, 97,000 people were homeless. A third of the population of Chicago lost everything. Their homes, their possessions, their livelihoods, just gone because of a cow. But we don't know it was the cow. We're not blaming the cow. I know it's a heavy sermon, so trying to make a joke in there every once in a while. Lost everything. People like Horatio Spafford. Horatio Spafford was an attorney in Chicago. He worked for Spafford, McDavid, and Wilson, which is, if Craig Lair was here, the joke was one of Craig Lair's favorite law firms. He's not here, so he doesn't get to enjoy that joke. But an attorney in Chicago, and he was actually very good friends with D.L. Moody, a famous evangelist at the time, and the namesake of the Moody Institute that's still in Chicago to this day. But Spafford was a successful attorney who, with his wealth, invested in, you guessed it, real estate. Specifically on the north side of the city, one of the parts of the city that completely demolished. So in a 3-day period, Spafford, like many of the residents in Chicago, lost everything, if not just about everything. As I was looking at the life of Horatio Spafford as somebody who lost everything, I immediately went to the book of Job. Because Spafford's life sounds a lot like Job. Spafford was a successful businessman. He was married, had 4 kids. He had probably everything that he could have wanted, just like Job. The book of Job is probably written in the 6th century BCE, which makes it one of the older books of the Old Testament. I point that out to say this has been a story that people have been telling for centuries. But it talks about how we deal with pain, how we deal with loss. And the book of Job begins with verse 1 through 3. In the land of Uz, great name, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Get into the family first, but listen to what else he's got. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. Now, if we're reading this for the first time, we're thinking, this dude is awesome. He's got everything that he could possibly imagine wanting. He's got possessions, he's got wealth, he's got family, he's got health. Things are looking great for Job. But the story gets weird so fast. Because the text tells us that there's this dialogue between Satan and God, where Satan goes to the presence of God, and they start talking about Job specifically, where God says, have you seen my servant Job? Look at him. He honors me. He is blameless. He does everything right. And Satan says, well, of course he does. What does he have to complain about? Look at the life that you have given him, God. Of course, he is going to honor you. Of course, he's going to worship you. He has everything that he could possibly imagine. And then God says, well, even if you took stuff away, I guarantee you that Job would still honor me. And they agree to this, where Satan is allowed to take things away from Job in order to prove that he will dishonor God. And so the text advances in this weird, almost comical way. And it begins in verse 13. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who's escaped to tell you. This has to be a crushing blow to Job. He's like, what do you mean that just in this one swoop, this possession is gone? But look at how the text adds on to this. It's piling on after piling on of Job losing more and more things. 16, while he was still speaking, while that previous messenger was still talking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and servants. And I am the only one who's escaped to tell you. We now have two individuals who are the only people who were able to escape and tell them. Things are getting rough for Job. We keep losing thing after thing, possession after possession. And if you're Job, you're probably just shell-shocked at this point. What is happening? But the text continues. In verse 17, while he was still speaking, another messenger came in and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. Not the camels. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. Again, if you're Job, you have to be wondering, what is happening? This is the worst day ever. Job probably can't even collect his thoughts enough to cognitively figure out what's going on before another person and another person comes in to tell him, hey, the camels are gone, the donkeys are gone, the oxen is gone. And then it gets worse, because up to this point, this has only been possessions. Things. But now we're about to start talking about blood, about family. While he was still speaking, while the previous messenger was still telling Job about what happened, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they're dead. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. How we deal with pain matters. How we respond to affliction, to suffering, to persecution, how we respond to those things matters. Will we turn away from God when our life gets challenging, or will we turn towards God? That is a choice that all of us get to make every time we are faced with some type of circumstance or situation that may be difficult, that may be challenging. And I want you to see how Job responds. Because in verse 20, at this, Job got up and tore his robe, shaved his head. He fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And the text tells us that in doing this, Job did not sin. Job recognizes that every day is a blessing from God, but every day is not guaranteed just smooth sailing. On this side of heaven, we will face pain, suffering, challenges. All of those things, we will experience those. But that doesn't mean that we need to turn away from God. In fact, what I see in this is that Job turns his attention, his focus, his whole drive in life, he turns it towards God when things get difficult. What he's doing here is saying, God, I don't know what's happening. I don't understand what's happening, God, but I will continue to praise you through this storm. And this frustrates Satan. Because Satan's like, I'm pulling everything I can away from this individual, and yet they will not turn away from God. And so then Satan attacks Job's health. The text tells us that all of these sores consume Job's body. Pain, irritation, it's just extremely uncomfortable for Job. But his health is all he has left. But then his wife turns to him and she says, are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. She's saying, what are you doing? You're suffering. You've lost everything. Now your health is at risk. What are we even doing here, Job? And Job responds, shall we accept good from God and not trouble? The Hebrew word there is hara, which is, I think, better translated adversity. Again, on this side of heaven, we will face challenges and difficulties. Our life is not guaranteed to be easy, but how we respond to that matters. Again, will we turn away from God or will we turn towards God? Which brings me back to Horatio Spafford. A few years after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, Spafford, like many Chicagoans, are trying to rebuild their lives. Recoup what they've lost, to rebuild. That is what people were doing then. And Spafford, like a lot of people, are kind of going back into real estate. He thinks that's kind of where he can rebuild a lot of his wealth, is as the city rebuilds, being a part of that. But it's been hard. It's been a difficult 2 years for Spafford and his family. And they're deciding that, hey, maybe we should go on a vacation somewhere. Now, a minute ago, I told you that Spafford was very good friends with D.L. Moody. Spafford hears that Moody is doing an evangelism tour in England. And so he's like, hey, what's a vacation without church? Let's go essentially do the European tour of D.L. Moody, and we'll also get to see England too. And so Spafford gears up his family for this vacation. His wife and his 4 daughters. They all plan to go to England to visit the country, but also to hear D.L. Moody speak. But Spafford is still trying to organize and settle all of his new business dealings in the city of Chicago. And he's run into these zoning issues as the city rebuilds and redefines itself. And so Spafford tells his family, his wife and his 4 daughters, he says, look, you guys go ahead. I know how much you like to go to church when you're on vacation. Go ahead, go across the pond. I'll meet up with you as soon as I deal with all these zoning issues. On November 22nd, 1873, roughly 2 years after the Great Chicago Fire, where Spafford lost all of his worldly possessions, the ship that his wife and his daughters were on was hit by an iron sailing vessel, crashes into their boat. 226 people died in that shipwreck, including Spafford's 4 daughters. His wife survives and actually gets to an island and then is able to send a telegraph home that says, saved alone. Talk about Job and Spafford being similar. It's so eerie how similar these 2 individuals were. Spafford loses every worldly possession that he has. The wealth that he has built is taken away from him. Job's his earthly possessions are taken away from him. Job's family is taken away from him. Spafford's family, his children, are taken away from him. He gets this telegram. Just imagine that for a moment. You've stayed back to deal with zoning issues, only to get this telegram from your wife that says saved alone. How we respond to pain and suffering matters. I've said it once and I'll say it again, that on this side of heaven, we are not guaranteed the easiest life. We're not guaranteed cupcakes and unicorns and all of those fun things that my daughter loves. We are guaranteed life, and this idea that the life that we are given today is a blessing. And how we respond to the challenges that we face each day matters. And that brings me to the point of this whole sermon. Job chooses to turn towards God instead of away from God. Even when his wife, his friends, they all try to tell Job, just throw in the towel. Job's like, I know God is doing something through this pain. I know that God can use this moment, this season in my life to be glorified and to do something with it. And that brings us back to Horatio Spafford. Because after learning that his children have perished in this shipwreck, he gets ready to go rescue his wife, and he starts to write a song. The song that Spafford wrote was, "It Is Well With My Soul." When peace like a river tendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. As I wrote this sermon this week, and I thought about this song, understanding the story behind this song adds a weight and a magnitude to it. Because I don't know what you're bringing to church today. I don't know what kind of week or month that you've had. I don't know when you took communion what you said, God, I need the body and blood of Christ to be present in this moment. But a story like Horatio Spafford's, text like Job, tells us that yes, life will be difficult. But how we respond to that matters. Will we be people that turn away from God when we face the challenges of life? Or will we be able to say, God, whatever circumstance we have found ourselves in, we will recognize that you are at work, God. That you have not abandoned us. That you will work with us through the fires, God. That you will be with us through the storms. And even as the seas get rough, we can say, it is well with my soul. Let's stand and sing together.